Welcome back to Nadir Audio. In today's video, we're going to take a look at the Chord Electronics Mojo 2 Portable DAC amp. I've wanted one of these guys ever since they came out a few years ago, and this second generation version has been out for a little over 2 years as of the making of this video. But at their normal retail price here in the United States of a little under $800, it was always hard to fit it into the budget. But when that price went down earlier this year to $650, I was finally able to fit it in and pick one up. So let's take a closer look. So the Mojo 2 comes packaged in this nice cardboard box. It has a magnetic clasp, so it's a good place to store the unit when you're not using it. And the first thing you notice about the Mojo 2 is that it was smaller than I was expecting. You can see here it fits pretty well in my hand, and it's also built to a pretty high build quality standard. So it's made out of aircraft quality aluminum, and everything seems to be really well machined and well put together. So when you first power it up, you get this pretty cool control interface with these buttons that change color. I thought this was really cool. It reminds me of the control panels that the Sleestacks used to use in the show Land of the Lost from the 70s that I watched when I was a kid. And it does take a little while to get used to, so I'm not going to go through all of the functions and features here, but we'll talk about some of the other ones a little later in the video. But you basically have a power button on the right, you have a menu button on the left, and then you have the two larger buttons in the center which allow you to move up and down. And you can see right now we've got it in the high gain volume mode, so the menu button is white. And it's a little hard to tell on my camera, it doesn't really pick up the colors really well, but the middle buttons right now are a pretty deep blue. They look really washed out in the video, but that basically corresponds to a line out, so that allows me to use this as a standalone DAC as well as a DAC amp, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. And I will say that I do really like the interface. You get used to it after a while. You remember what the colors stand for. And over here, for example, the power button, again, it looks orange in the video, but it's red right now, which indicates that it's in 44.1 kilohertz sample rate. And there are different colors for different rates. It goes all the way up to 768 kilohertz for 32-bit, and it also supports DSD 256. So if we had it plugged in and there was a DSD source, it would be illuminated white right now. But I'd say that overall, I tend to like things that maybe would have like a dedicated volume knob. It's just a little bit nicer feeling when you're using the device, but you do get used to these up and down controls, and they do have a nice positive click, and they feel pretty good. It's just sometimes a knob can be preferable, but that's not really a big deal. Overall, I'd say just in terms of the build quality and the user interface, I really like the Mojo 2. The only other slight drawback is I've noticed in use that it does tend to get pretty warm. So if it's something that you're planning to keep in your pocket, it might be get a little too warm for that. I don't keep it in my pocket when I'm using it, so that's not a big deal for me. But otherwise, I really like it. And then of course there's the sound quality, which is excellent. So one of the first things I did when I got this is I put it into my main system, and I was creating the video about the Klipsch RP600M Mark IIs and using those with my tube amp. And as soon as I plugged this into the system, it just sounded great. And so I've been using this actually as a DAC in my main system, as well as using it as a portable unit. So in this video, before we talk about headphones, which we'll do in a little bit, let's talk a little bit about it in my main system. And we're going to be talking about some things I've listened to recently in my solid state system. So as I mentioned earlier in the video, when I first got the Mojo 2, I just put it directly into my main system, and I really liked the way it sounded. It was a noticeable improvement over what I had been using before, but at that time, before I did any A/B comparisons, all I could really say is that it just sounded more natural, and I just liked this way it sounded a little better than what I was using previously. But for this video, we're going to do some A/B comparisons, and we're going to stick with my solid state system. So that's my Saga S preamp here, the Vidar 1 power amp, and then we're using my LS50 speakers. And since the last time I made a video using those speakers, I bought these Kanto speaker stands. These are 32-inch stands, which gets the KEF LS50s where they need to be ear height when I'm sitting across the room, and that actually does dramatically improve the sound. And I also think they're just sturdier, nicer stands than what I was using before. Now for sources, I'm using my Apple TV, which I use as a streamer. That's for stuff that I don't have physical media. And then we've got our two players here, my Oppo and my Rotel CD11 Tribute. So I've been using both of those as a transport in this video. I haven't noticed a huge difference as transports. There's a big difference as players, and if you're interested in that, you can see my previous videos. But I'd say that overall, as I started to do more A-B comparisons, I think there are lots of subtle differences between the Geshelli J2, my previous favorite sub $300 DAC, and the Mojo 2. But really the big difference, and I think where the Mojo 2 really pulls ahead, is in how it handles reverb and reverb trails. So that can be, you know, natural room reverb, which lends itself to that air around instruments that I've talked about in previous videos. But it also can be just the natural reverb of acoustic instruments recorded separately, and also artificial reverb added in electronic music and others. It just handles it in a way that sounds more natural to my ears. And also, you know, you can get a nice room sound where, you know, both of these DACs image really well, and you get a really well-defined sound stage with precision. But with the additional air around the instruments and the better handling of reverb, it just sounds like a more cohesive whole, kind of like you're hearing it in real life, as opposed to things just being three-dimensionally arranged in space for you. So that's kind of the big difference. But let's delve a little bit into some of the recordings I've listened to. I think for some recordings there's a subtle difference between these DACs, and then for some audiophile level recordings it's a much bigger difference. So let's talk a little bit about individual recordings. So I listened to a lot of electronic albums, including this one by Anthony Naples called Orbs. This is a really cool album I got on Bandcamp a couple of months ago, and I definitely recommend it. But it has a really big immersive sound, and it's mostly electronic sounds, but there's some sampled sounds. And it sounded really great actually with both DACs, but I did slightly prefer it with the Mojo. I feel that there was more body on the bass and percussive parts especially, and then also there was a certain amount of purposeful distortion in certain parts of this album that could get a little fatiguing, I found, on the Geshelli, which I feel tends to have a little bit harder of an edge around things, especially on the high end, and it may be just a touch of digital glare. Whereas with the Mojo 2, I wasn't getting that. And so overall, you know, if I had to pick one of these two, I preferred the Mojo 2. I think it's a very immersive album, and it just made it slightly more immersive on the Mojo 2. But if you're listening to music like this, recorded this way, I'd say, and you were considering the Mojo 2 as an upgrade path, it's probably not worth it. I think that if you're not doing A-B comparisons, they're both perfectly fine, and it's not dramatic enough of a difference, I think, to warrant an upgrade. So I also listened to some good recordings by various bands, including this 1980 album by Grace Jones called Warm Leatherette. Now this is not an audiophile recording in the sense that it was recorded live to a 2-channel stereo microphone, but it was a very good studio recording, and I feel like here the difference between the Mojo 2 and the J2 was a bit bigger. So the soundstage, again, both of these DACs have a really good sound stage, and actually the J2 is just slightly wider, but I feel like the Mojo 2 is a deeper sound stage, which I think you get more bang for your buck with that. But again, that sort of more lifelike, better handling of the reverb, even though this wasn't recorded live, all the instruments sort of had their own reverb in the separate areas where they were recorded, and the voice as well. And it really just made the whole thing feel a little bit more real, again, like a live band was playing in front of you rather than something that was sort of constructed to simulate that. So again, it's not a huge difference, but I'd say if you're listening to good quality recordings, this style of music, this is where it might make more sense to do an upgrade from the J2 to the Mojo 2. But let's talk a little bit more about some audiophile recordings I listened to. So I also listened to a few audiophile recordings, and I feel like this is where the Mojo 2 really pulled ahead of the J2. So this particular recording is by Anna Thorvaldsdottir. It's a modern orchestral piece entitled Arkora Aeon, and it was performed by the Iceland Symphony Orchestra, and it was very well recorded. This is a true audiophile recording. So I played this one back on the Oppo in the 2-channel mode. There's a few different versions of this on these discs, including a Dolby Atmos version. I was listening to the 2-channel, which I believe is 24-bit 192. but my TV was converting it to 48 before it got to the Mojo 2, but it still sounded excellent. So I feel like the Mojo 2 has slightly better dynamics than the J2, so that's something you're noticing, but it really came down to that more natural sounding reverb, and on this recording it really added a density to the sound, so you really felt like you were listening in a large orchestral hall rather than sort of a representation of it. Again, both DACs are very resolving, especially on the high end, so you're not getting any additional information necessarily except for maybe that air around instruments, but it's more just being able to hear the room and just to get that illusion of actually being there. And that was true on this recording, and it's definitely something I noticed on a lot of the audiophile recordings I listened to as well. So I think that if you are listening to audiophile type recordings, this is one of the places where I think the Mojo 2 would make a lot of sense as an upgrade from the J2. So before I closed out this video, I did want to talk about using the Mojo 2 for its primary intended purpose as a portable DAC amp with headphones. So I've compared it to a couple of portable DAC amps that I use quite a bit. So we've got my first generation iFi hip DAC over here, which was my favorite portable DAC amp in terms of sound quality. And then we've got my X-Duo XP2 Pro over here, which has been my favorite just in terms of convenience. It's a Bluetooth device, and it's just kind of easy to use when you just want to grab and go with something. And then as far as headphones, so over here on the far left, we've got my Meze 99 Classics Noir Edition, and then we've got my HiFi and Sendera open back headphones over here on the right. So we'll start with the Mezes, and of these three, so the hip DAC is a big step up in terms of sound quality from the X-Duo, pretty much in every way. And then when you jump from the iFi to the Mojo 2, you pretty much get the same thing. So it's better in pretty much every way. That includes sound staging, imaging, precision, that sort of reverb room sound that we talked about, and air around instruments and voices. And also I feel it's a little bit better in terms of dynamics, and it certainly has a higher resolution, especially in the high end. So overall, it's just, it's a much more expensive portable DAC amp, so it's not surprising that it performs much better as well. I think the only place where the iFi kind of gives it a run for the money is just sort of in the mid-range tonality. The iFi has a really nice sort of warm sound that pairs well with the Meze Classics. So when you move on to the Senderas, it's a bit of the same thing. So we can leave out the XP2 Pro because it's just not powerful enough to power the Senderas. You just can't get any volume out of them. So for the Senderas, we'll just be talking about the hip DAC and the Mojo 2. But again, I think even with the Senderas, it's just better in every way, and especially when you're listening to really good quality audiophile type recordings, it just is amazing, and that sort of realism that you get that I've been talking about a lot in this video with the Senderas is just great. So yeah, with these headphones at least, definitely the Mojo 2 is my top choice. I'd say that if you do listen to a lot of things that maybe rock music that isn't super well recorded, then maybe the iFi and the Mezes might be a good combination for you, whereas it might be a little fatiguing with the Mojo 2 and the Senderas. I tend to listen to music all over the spectrum, but for the vast majority of what I listen to, I prefer the Mojo 2. So yeah, so I really like the Mojo 2. It's going to be my primary standalone DAC in my main system for now. I'll just plug it in when I'm using my main system, and then it's my primary portable DAC amp as well. So we will be looking at other DACs. So what I'd like to do is look at sort of the next level of standalone DACs, and we may be able to get one in later this year. And we'll try it out in the main system, and we'll also try it out in my desktop here, but also with speakers, because I do want to come up with something eventually to replace the shit Modi that I'm using back here with that system, which is perfectly fine, but I just kind of want to take it to the next level up and try that out. So we'll see if we can do that this year, but in the meantime, I'm going to be using the Mojo 2 for pretty much everything as far as the DAC is concerned. So yeah, I really like it. I highly recommend it. I think it's a really good deal at the current price of $650 here in the US. So I think that's going to do it for this one, guys, but thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.